All right, so welcome to another deep dive, you guys, here on the Book Summary Podcast.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Oh, yeah.
And make sure you like and subscribe to the channel
Yeah.
so you can see more videos just like this.
Absolutely.
So Chris Voss, he was an FBI hostage negotiator.
Wow.
And so this is a really fascinating book that goes into the tactics that he used in really high-stakes negotiations to get people to to cooperate, to collaborate, and ultimately to come to an agreement.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things about the book is that he kind of goes back and forth between talking about these really intense hostage situations
Right.
and then talking about how you can apply these same principles to everyday life.
Okay.
And so you can use these to get a better salary at work. You can use them to negotiate with your kids about, what time they have to go to bed.
Really?
All sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
And so one of the first things that he talks about is this idea of System 1 and System 2 thinking.
Okay.
So System 1 thinking is that fast, intuitive, like emotional part of our brain.
Right.
It's the part that's responsible for our fight or flight response.
Interesting.
And then System 2 thinking is the slower, more deliberate, rational part of our brain.
Okay.
So it's the part that we use for like problem solving and decision making.
Okay. Yeah.
And so Voss argues that most people think negotiation is all about System 2 thinking, right?
Right. Logic and reasoning.
Exactly. It's all about like being really logical and rational.
Yeah.
But he says, actually, it's really System 1 thinking that's driving most of our decisions,
Okay.
especially when we're under pressure.
That makes sense.
Because when we're under pressure, we don't have time to like sit down and think things through really carefully.
Yeah.
We have to make quick decisions. And so that's where our emotions come in. And so he says, if we want to be effective negotiators, we need to understand how to tap into that emotional side of the brain.
Okay.
And we need to understand how to use it to our advantage.
Interesting.
And so one of the most surprising tactics that he talks about in the book is the power of no.
The power of no.
Yeah, he says that no is actually a really valuable tool in negotiation.
Oh, that's so counterintuitive.
It is, right, because most people think that the goal of negotiation is to get to yes.
Yeah, to get people to agree with you.
Exactly.
Okay.
But he says actually sometimes it's more beneficial to get people to say no.
Really?
Yeah, he says that when someone says no, they feel like they're in control.
Okay.
They feel like they're not being pressured or coerced into anything.
Right, because they made a decision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he says that can actually make them more open to hearing what you have to say.
Oh, so it kind of disarms them a little bit?
Exactly.
Okay.
And it also gives you valuable information.
Okay.
So when someone says no, you can ask them why not. And that can help you to understand their objections and their concerns.
Yeah, you can learn more about where they're coming from.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you can use that information to tailor your approach and to come up with a solution that works for both of you.
Right, because if you just keep pushing for yes without understanding why they're saying no, you're not going to get anywhere?
Exactly. You're just going to butt heads and no one's going to be happy.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how does this power of no actually play out in like a real negotiation?
Okay, so he tells this really interesting story about how he learned this lesson himself.
Okay.
So early on in his career with the FBI, he really wanted to join the crisis negotiation team.
Okay, yeah.
Which is like the elite team of negotiators who handle the most high-stakes situations.
Wow, yeah.
So he went to go talk to the woman who was in charge of the team. Her name was Amy Bondreau.
Okay.
And he thought he was like, he had all the right credentials. He thought he was a shoo-in for the team.
Right.
But she started asking him all these questions.
Sir.
Like, do you have any experience in hostage negotiation?
Right.
And he had to say no.
Of course.
Do you have any specific training in crisis negotiation?
Okay.
And he had to say no.
Uh-huh.
And then she asked him, have you ever successfully negotiated a hostage situation?
Yeah.
And of course he had to say no.
Of course he had to say no.
And he was like totally deflated.
Yeah, I bet.
He thought he had just blown his chance to get on the team.
Right.
But then she said something really interesting.
What did she say?
She said, go volunteer at a suicide hotline.
At a suicide hotline?
Yeah. And then come back and talk to me.
Okay.
And he was like, what?
Wait.
But he did it.
Okay.
He went and volunteered at a suicide hotline for a while. And he said that was like a really eye-opening experience for him.
Yeah, I bet.
Because he had to learn how to really listen to people.
Yeah.
And how to empathize with them.
Right.
And how to help them to work through their problems.
Okay.
And so after a few months of doing that, he went back to talk to Amy Bondurot.
Uh-huh.
And she said, okay, you're on the team.
Wow.
And so he realized that all those no's that he had gotten earlier,
Right.
they weren't actually rejections. They were actually opportunities for growth
Interesting.
because they forced him to develop the skills that he needed to be successful on the team.
Okay.
And so that's one of the key takeaways from this idea of the power of no.
Okay.
It's that sometimes no isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's actually an opportunity to learn and to grow and to become a better negotiator.
Okay, so it's about embracing the no.
Exactly.
All right, that's interesting.
And so that kind of leads into another really important concept in the book, which is active listening.
Active listening.
Yeah.
So what does that mean exactly?
So active listening is about really paying attention to what the other person is saying.
Right.
And not just like hearing the words, but also trying to understand the emotions behind the words
Ugh.
and the needs and the desires that are driving their behavior.
So it's not just about listening to what they're saying, but also how they're saying it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's about trying to put yourself in their shoes.
Right. To see the world from their perspective.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so Voss says that active listening is one of the most important skills that you can develop as a negotiator because it allows you to build rapport with the other person.
Okay.
And it helps you to gather information.
Uh-huh.
And it helps you to identify their black swans.
Your black swans.
Yeah, we'll talk about that
Later.
But for now, let's just say that black swans are like those hidden pieces of information that could totally change the game in a negotiation.
Interesting.
And so active listening is how you find those black swans.
Okay.
And so one of the techniques that Voss recommends for active listening is called mirroring.
Mirroring.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's that?
So mirroring is basically where you repeat back the last few words of what the other person just said. And you do it in a questioning tone. So for example, if someone says, I'm really frustrated with this situation, you would say, frustrated with this situation.
Oh, okay.
And so it's like you're holding up a mirror to them
Okay.
and you're showing them that you're really listening
Okay.
and that you're trying to understand their perspective.
And does that actually work?
Yeah, it does. It's crazy.
Really?
Yeah, there was a study done with waiters
Okay.
where they were instructed to either mirror their customers' language
Okay.
or to just offer generic positive reinforcement. And the waiters who mirrored their customers received significantly bigger tips
Just by repeating back what the customer said?
just by repeating back a few words.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's amazing.
It's like this simple little technique that has this huge impact on people's behavior.
That is incredible.
Yeah. And so Voss says that mirroring works because it taps into our innate desire to be understood.
Okay.
So when someone mirrors our language, it creates a sense of connection. Like this person gets me.
Right.
And when we feel understood, we're much more likely to open up and to be receptive to the other person's ideas.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So mirroring is a really powerful tool for building rapport and for creating a more collaborative atmosphere in a negotiation.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah, and it's really easy to do.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
You just have to listen carefully
Okay.
and repeat back a few words. So it's something that you can start using right away.
Cool.
Yeah.
So mirroring is one active listening technique.
Yes.
Are there any others that he talks about?
Yeah, he also talks about labeling emotions.
Labeling emotions.
Yeah.
So what's that?
So labeling emotions is where you explicitly acknowledge the other person's feelings.
Okay.
So, for example, if someone seems angry,
Hmm.
you might say, it sounds like you're feeling really angry.
Okay.
Or if they seem sad, you might say, you seem really sad about this.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like you're putting a label on their emotion
Right.
and you're acknowledging it.
Oh.
And Voss says that this is really important because people often don't feel heard or understood.
Yeah, especially in a conflict.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so when you label their emotions, it shows them that you're paying attention
Yeah.
and that you care about how they're feeling.
Mm.
And that could be really disarming,
Okay.
especially in a tense situation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so he tells this story about a negotiation with a man who was holding his family hostage.
Oh, wow.
And the man was like really enraged. He was threatening violence.
Right.
And so Voss, instead of meeting that anger with force, he used labeling.
Mm-hmm.
He said something like, it sounds like you're feeling incredibly trapped and desperate right now.
Wow.
And that's a really bold thing to say to someone who's holding a gun.
Yeah.
But it worked.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
By acknowledging the man's feelings, Voss was able to create a little bit of connection. And that was enough to open up a dialogue.
Yeah.
And to start chipping away at the man's anger and fear.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example of how powerful labeling can be.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's something that you can use in any negotiation,
Okay.
not just hostage situations.
So how would you use it in like an everyday negotiation?
So let's say you're negotiating with your boss about a raise,
Okay.
and your boss says no.
Uh-huh.
You could say something like, "It sounds like you're not convinced that I deserve a raise."
Okay.
And that would give your boss an opportunity to explain their reasoning,
Yeah.
and it would also show them that you're listening
Hmm.
and that you're trying to understand their perspective.
Okay.
And that can go a long way in building rapport and in getting to a yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
So we've talked about mirroring and labeling.
right.
Are there any other active listening techniques that Voss recommends?
Yeah, he also talks about using calibrated questions.
Calibrated questions.
Yeah.
What are those?
So calibrated questions are basically open-ended questions
Uh-huh.
that start with how or what. And so the idea is that instead of asking questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no,
Right.
you ask questions that force the other person to think more deeply
Okay.
and to elaborate on their thoughts and feelings.
So it's like you're giving them the opportunity to tell their story.
Exactly.
Okay.
And by doing that, you're gathering valuable information,
Right.
and you're also giving them the illusion of control
Interesting.
because they feel like they're the ones who are driving the conversation,
Okay.
even though you're actually the one who's asking the questions.
That's clever.
Yeah.
So do you have any examples of how this works in practice?
Yeah, so Voss tells this story about a student who was struggling to collect payments from delinquent ticket holders.
Okay.
And they were using this script that was like really confrontational.
Right.
It was basically like, you owe us money, pay up, or else.
Okay.
And it wasn't very effective.
Yeah.
People were getting defensive. They were hanging up the phone.
Uh-huh.
And very few people were actually paying. So Voss helped them to revise the script. And instead of using these confrontational statements,
Okay.
he had them start using calibrated questions.
Gotcha.
So they started asking things like, what's the best way for you to handle this situation? And how can we work together to get this resolved?
Okay.
And so instead of dictating the terms, they were inviting the other person to be part of the solution.
Right.
And the results were dramatic.
Really?
Yeah, the delinquent ticket holders were much more receptive to this new approach.
Okay.
They felt like they were being listened to,
Uh-huh.
that their concerns were being taken seriously.
Yeah.
And guess what? The payment rate skyrocketed
Just by changing the way they were asking the questions.
just by changing the language.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So it's really all about understanding the psychology behind human interaction.
Exactly.
Oh,
We all
yeah.
want to feel heard and understood and respected.
Right.
And when we do, we're much more likely to cooperate
Yeah.
and to be open to compromise.
Okay, so that's active listening.
That's active listening. And we got the power of no.
Yes.
We barely scratched the surface of this book.
I know there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
So stay tuned because we're going to be diving deeper into Never Split the Difference.
All right. I'm excited.
And in the meantime, if you're enjoying this deep dive, be sure to hit that like button
Yes.
and subscribe to the Book Summary Podcast
Absolutely.
so you can see more videos just like this.
All right. I'll see you next time.
See you next time.
So, active listening, that's a great bridge to another really important concept in the book.
Okay.
This idea of tactical empathy.
Okay. Tactical empathy.
Yeah.
That sounds a little,
A little intense, right?
yeah, a little more intense than just, feeling bad for someone.
Yeah. So it is about genuinely understanding the other person's perspective.
Okay.
And that means their needs and their fears and their motivations and even their biases. But the tactical part is that you use this understanding to your advantage in the negotiation.
Okay. So you're not trying to manipulate them.
No, it's not about manipulation.
Agreed.
It's about trying to understand them so well that you can find a solution that genuinely works for both of you.
So it's a win-win.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
Okay.
And Voss argues that one of the best ways to develop this tactical empathy is through labeling.
Okay, labeling, like we talked about before with the emotions.
Exactly.
Oh.
So instead of just saying, you seem angry,
Right.
you might say something like, you seem angry because you feel like you've been misled.
So you're connecting it to their experience.
Exactly.
Okay.
And by doing that, you're showing a much deeper level of understanding,
Right.
which can really disarm the other person and make them more open to listening to your perspective.
So tactical empathy is like a superpower.
It can be.
Okay.
Voss even tells a story about a student who was trying to get on a last-minute flight.
Oh, okay.
Flights were overbooked. It was chaos at the gate.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
But instead of getting caught up in the frenzy,
Really?
the student took a moment to observe the gate agent.
Okay.
And he used tactical empathy, putting himself in her shoes.
Okay.
And he realized she looked overwhelmed,
Right.
frustrated,
Yeah.
maybe even a little powerless.
Yeah, I bet.
So when it was his turn, instead of like demanding a seat,
Yeah.
he approached her with empathy.
Okay.
He used labeling, saying things like, "It looks like you're having a really tough day.
Okay.
And I bet you wish you had more options to offer people."
Right.
He was acknowledging her situation.
Wow.
And you know what?
What?
She found him a seat on the flight.
She did.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
It's a perfect example of how tactical empathy
Right.
can make all the difference.
Because he wasn't just thinking about himself.
Exactly. He was thinking about her.
Yeah. And how he could connect with her.
And it worked.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's tactical empathy. But sometimes you're dealing with someone who's playing hardball.
Okay.
They're trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage.
Right.
And that's where Voss's concept of bending reality comes in.
Bending reality.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're talking.
It sounds like a Jedi mind trick, right?
Yeah.
But it's not magic.
Okay.
It's about understanding how our perceptions can be influenced.
Okay.
One of the most powerful tools he talks about is anchoring.
Anchoring like with a boat.
Kind of like that.
Okay.
So in a negotiation, the anchor is that first number that gets thrown out there.
Okay.
It sets the tone for the whole discussion.
Even if it's crazy.
Even if it's totally unreasonable,
Okay.
it gets lodged in everyone's minds.
So like if I'm trying to sell you my car and I say I want $100,000 for it,
Right.
that's the anchor.
That's the anchor.
Even though it's way too much.
Way too much.
Okay.
But now you're thinking, okay, maybe it's worth like $50,000.
Right.
Right? So Voss actually suggests letting the other side anchor first.
Really? Wow.
It gives you valuable information.
Okay.
You learn their expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn how they value the deal.
Okay.
Now, if they give you a crazy low anchor,
Yeah.
you can use labels to express your surprise.
Like, wow, that's lower than I expected.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
then use calibrated questions to understand their reasoning.
So you're not just accepting their anchor.
No, you're using it to guide the conversation.
That's smart.
And if you're expecting an extreme anchor,
Yeah.
prepare yourself mentally.
Okay.
Don't get thrown off by that first punch.
So like brace for impact.
Exactly.
Okay.
Another reality-bending tactic Voss talks about is loss aversion.
Or loss aversion.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a cognitive bias
Okay.
that basically says we feel the pain of a loss more strongly than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
So we hate to lose more than we love to win.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Voss shows us how to use this to our advantage.
Okay.
He tells a story about securing voice talent for a project at a rock-bottom price.
Okay.
He anchored their expectations low by mentioning the project's limited budget.
Right. So they're thinking low cost.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then, when he presented his offer,
Uh-huh.
he framed it in terms of potential loss.
Okay.
He said something like, "I know this isn't a lot, but if you don't take this deal, you'll miss out on the opportunity to be part of this amazing project."
So instead of focusing on what they gain, he's focusing on what they lose.
Exactly.
Right.
And because of loss aversion,
Yeah.
they were more likely to accept that low offer
That's clever.
than if he had just focused on the potential gain.
So it's all about framing.
It's all about framing.
Okay.
Voss also talks about the power of fairness.
Fairness.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that just about being a good person?
It's more than that.
Okay.
Fairness is a deeply ingrained human need.
Really?
Yeah, even monkeys understand fairness.
Monkeys.
There's a famous study where two capuchin monkeys were given different rewards for the same task.
Oh, no.
One monkey got delicious grapes, and the other monkey got cucumbers.
Oh, I bet the cucumber monkey was not happy.
It flipped out.
Really?
Yeah, it was not a fair trade.
That's hilarious.
So this sense of fairness,
Right.
it's not just about getting equal rewards.
Okay.
It's about feeling respected.
Mm.
Like our needs and opinions are being taken seriously.
So how do we leverage this need for fairness in a negotiation?
Voss emphasizes the power of the word fair.
Okay.
People are much more likely to comply with a request if they
Okay.
feel like they're being treated fairly.
So it's not just about what you offer, but how you present it.
Exactly. You have to convince the other person that your offer is fair.
Got it.
And one of the best ways to do that is to involve them in defining what fair means.
Okay.
Ask calibrated questions like, what would a fair solution look like to you?
Right.
Or what would need to happen for you to feel like this deal is fair?
Okay, so you're bringing them into the process.
Exactly. You're making them feel like they're part of the decision making.
Okay, that's interesting.
which makes them more likely to see you as fair and trustworthy.
So it's all about building that trust.
It is.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Tactical empathy, bending reality, fairness.
The luck.
It's a lot.
But there's one more key concept we need to discuss.
Okay.
Black swans.
Black swan.
It's the metaphor.
Exactly. Like those unexpected events that nobody sees coming.
Right.
So Voss uses this term black swans to describe those hidden pieces of information.
Okay.
The unknown unknowns.
Right.
That can completely change the game in a negotiation.
So it's like that missing piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Voss believes that finding these black swans is often the key to unlocking successful negotiations.
Okay.
He shares incredible stories about how uncovering hidden constraints or unexpected motivations led to breakthroughs and hostage situations and business deals.
So like what, for example?
Well, he talks about a negotiation with Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban. Wow.
The billionaire entrepreneur. They were discussing a potential deal.
Okay.
Everything seemed to be going well,
Mm-hmm.
but Cuban was hesitant to commit.
Right.
Voss sensed there was something holding him back,
Okay.
some unspoken constraint.
I wouldn't want to be the one to try to get information out of Mark Cuban.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating.
Yeah.
But Voss persisted.
Okay.
He used calibrated questions like, what would need to happen for you to feel comfortable moving forward? And what are your biggest concerns right now?
So he's digging deeper.
Exactly.
Okay.
And eventually, Cuban revealed his black swan.
What was it?
It turned out that Cuban had a prior commitment
Okay.
that was preventing him from fully investing in the deal.
I see.
He couldn't publicly disclose this commitment, but he was able to allude to it in a way that Voss understood.
Gotcha.
So by uncovering that hidden constraint,
Yeah.
Voss was able to restructure the deal in a way that worked for both parties.
Wow, that's amazing.
And that's the power of finding black swans. It's about going beyond the surface.
Right.
To discover those hidden pieces of information that can transform the negotiation.
It's like detective work.
It is.
Okay, so how do we find these black swans?
Voss emphasizes active listening.
Okay.
Pay attention not just to what people say,
Right.
but how they say it.
Right.
He even suggests having backup listeners.
Backup listeners.
Yeah, their sole job is to listen for those subtle cues
Interesting.
that the main negotiator might miss.
Okay.
And perhaps most importantly, Voss stresses the importance of suspending disbelief.
Okay.
When we encounter something that doesn't make sense,
Right.
our brains want to dismiss it
Right.
as crazy or irrational.
Yeah.
But Voss argues that those seemingly irrational moments
Okay.
are often the most valuable.
Mm.
They're the clues that can lead us to the black swans.
So we need to be more open-minded.
Exactly.
Okay.
Be curious, embrace the unknown,
Okay.
and dig deeper when things don't quite add up.
So black swans, they're important.
They are.
Okay, what else does Voss talk about?
He also talks about different negotiation styles.
Okay, like what?
He identifies 3 main bargaining styles.
Wow.
The analyst, the accommodator, and the assertive.
Okay, and each one has its own...
Each style has its own strengths and weaknesses,
Okay.
its own approach to time, information, and communication.
Okay, let's break it down.
Okay, so analysts,
Mm.
they love data and preparation.
Okay.
They're methodical, logical, and risk-averse.
Mm.
They want all the information before making a decision.
Like chess players.
Exactly.
Okay, what about accommodators?
Accommodators are all about building relationships,
Okay.
maintaining harmony.
Yeah.
They're great collaborators,
Uh-huh.
but they can be too quick to concede,
Right.
so they might end up with a less than ideal outcome.
Okay, and assertives.
Assertives are all about action.
Okay.
They're decisive, confident, and they like to move quickly.
Uh-huh.
They can be incredibly persuasive,
Right.
but sometimes come across as aggressive.
Okay, so each style has its blind spots.
They do,
Okay.
but Voss provides specific tips for dealing with each style.
Like what?
For example, when negotiating with an analyst,
Uh-huh.
be prepared with data and evidence.
Okay.
With an accommodator, focus on building rapport and finding common ground.
So speak their language.
Exactly.
Okay.
And with an assertive, be clear, direct, and respectful of their time
Okay.
and their need for control.
This is helpful.
Yeah, and Voss brings all these concepts to life
Huh.
with incredible case studies from his years as an FBI hostage negotiator.
Wow.
He takes you inside the Harlem Bank standoff,
Okay.
a kidnapping in Haiti,
Uh-huh.
the tobacco farmers standoff,
Wow.
Each story is like a masterclass in negotiation.
It's amazing to see how these skills
Yeah.
honed to these extreme circumstances
Right.
can be applied to everyday life.
They can.
Yeah.
And that's one of the key takeaways from the book.
Yeah.
Negotiation is a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned and improved with practice.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And speaking of practice, if you're enjoying this deep dive, be sure to hit that like button.
Yes.
And subscribe to Book Summary Podcast
Absolutely.
for more insightful book summaries like this one.
Okay.
We'll be back next week with another book that will blow your mind.
Looking forward to it. You know, one thing that I keep thinking about is how we can take all this amazing stuff that we've learned from Never Split the Difference and
Right.
put it into practice.
Yeah, because it's one thing to like read about it
Right.
and understand the concepts,
Exactly.
but it's another thing entirely to actually use it.
To actually apply it in real life.
Yeah, and I'm not an FBI hostage negotiator,
Right. Me neither.
so how do I use these tactics in my everyday life?
Well, that's the beauty of it. You know, Voss emphasizes that these principles are universal.
Okay.
They apply to any situation where you're trying to reach an agreement,
So like,
negotiating a salary, buying a car,
Mhm.
even deciding where to go for dinner.
Right, it's all negotiation.
It's all negotiation.
Okay, so how do we actually do it then?
Well, one of the first things is to be aware of your own negotiation style.
Okay.
Are you an analyst, an accommodator, or an assertive?
Right. Those three that we talked about?
Exactly. Once you know your own tendencies,
Yeah.
you can start to adapt your approach depending on who you're negotiating with.
So it's like knowing your strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then it's about being observant.
Okay.
Pay attention to the other person's body language, their tone of voice, the words they choose.
It's like reading their mind.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
And don't forget those calibrated questions.
The how and what questions.
Exactly. They're so powerful for gathering information and guiding the conversation.
Yeah, I like those.
And don't be afraid to use labels to acknowledge their emotions.
Right.
It shows empathy and builds rapport.
Which is key.
It is.
Okay.
And if you encounter something that doesn't make sense, don't just dismiss it.
Right, because it could be a black swan.
It could be a black swan.
Okay.
So be curious, ask questions, dig deeper,
Gotcha.
and don't be afraid to challenge your assumptions.
Okay. I think I can do that.
Yeah, and the best part is,
Mm-hmm.
these are skills that we can use in every aspect of our lives.
Right. Not just at work.
Exactly, in our personal relationships with our families.
Yeah. It's all about communication.
It is.
Well, I feel like we've really covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
And I've learned so much.
Me too.
It's really made me rethink how I approach negotiation.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you enjoyed this deep dive,
Definitely.
be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the Book Summary Podcast
Absolutely.
for more insightful book summaries just like this one.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.